Hello friends and welcome back to the Unity Diaries. This is the first part of the episode. Let's start. The courtroom had already been tense before Meri Brown walked through the doors. People were expecting another difficult hearing, another round of arguments about money, family separation, legal documents, and the complicated history that had slowly pulled the Brown family apart. Reporters sat in the back row with notebooks open. Representatives connected to the production watched quietly from the side. Christine and Janelle were seated together, each trying to understand what might happen next. Kody and Robyn sat with their attorneys, appearing prepared for another legal battle. But nobody was prepared for Meri. She entered the courtroom without making a scene. There was no dramatic announcement, no argument with anyone, and no attempt to draw attention to herself. She simply walked in carrying a thin pale blue folder with red edging. It was an ordinary-looking folder, but the way Meri held it made it feel like something far more important. She carried it carefully in one hand, almost as though she understood that everything inside it could change the direction of the entire case. Meri had remained publicly silent for more than a year. That silence had become part of the family story. People had wondered what she was thinking, what she knew, and whether she would ever speak openly about everything that had happened. Now, without saying a word, she had given everyone the first clue that her silence had not meant she had nothing to say. It meant she had been waiting. The courtroom noticed her immediately. Christine straightened in her chair. Janelle stopped whispering to the person beside her. Even Robyn, who had been focused on the proceedings moments earlier, looked toward the door. Kody's reaction was different. The moment his eyes landed on the folder, his body seemed to tense. He recognized something about it. Maybe it was the label. Maybe it was the memory of the documents Meri had previously refused to surrender. Or maybe it was simply the knowledge that Meri had walked into court carrying something she had never been willing to discuss publicly. Robyn reached beneath the table and touched Kody's wrist. "Don't," she whispered. But Kody was already staring. Meri continued toward the front of the courtroom. She wore a slate gray dress, simple and restrained. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was almost impossible to read. There was no smile, no nervous laugh, no glance toward Kody seeking approval or reassurance. For once, Meri was completely alone. She took the center seat. Not beside Kody. Not beside Robyn. Not even immediately beside an attorney. She sat by herself. The judge looked over the courtroom and cleared his throat. This court will now reconvene for Session 3 in the matter concerning the Brown family financial and legal separation proceedings. Attorneys shifted in their seats. Christine's attorney stood and acknowledged the judge. Janelle's attorney did the same. Kody's lawyers exchanged a few quiet words. Meri did not move. Then she raised her hand slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge looked at her. "Mrs. Brown." Meri's voice was calm. "May I enter new evidence into the record?" The courtroom changed instantly. It was subtle at first. A few heads turned. A reporter lifted a pen. One of the attorneys leaned forward. Meri placed the blue folder on the table. Then she pushed it toward the judge. Robyn gasped. It wasn't the kind of gasp people make when they are merely surprised. It was short, involuntary, almost frightened. Kody's attorney immediately rose halfway from his seat. "Objection, Your Honor. We were not notified of any such submission." Meri didn't look at him. "You weren't supposed to be." The attorney stared at her. The judge raised one hand. "Let's slow down." The courtroom became quiet again. He looked at Meri. "Mrs. Brown, is this information pertinent to the claims currently before this court?" Meri rested one hand on the folder. "It is about the truth." The judge waited. Meri continued. "And DNA doesn't lie." For several seconds, nobody moved. The sentence seemed to hang in the room. DNA. A reporter in the back row leaned toward another reporter and silently mouthed the word. Kody's face changed. Robyn looked down. Christine stared at Meri. Janelle's expression became increasingly serious. The judge opened the folder. He turned the first page. Then another. His expression changed. His eyebrows drew together. His lips tightened. He read the page again, slower this time. Then he looked toward Robyn. Then Kody. Then Meri. Very well, he said quietly. We'll proceed. But his voice had changed. There was now something different in the room. This wasn't simply another dispute over money. Meri had brought something into court that appeared to reach far deeper into the Brown family's history. The judge continued reading. Every page he turned seemed to make the room more uncomfortable. Meri sat perfectly still. Her hands were folded. Her eyes remained fixed ahead. Christine leaned slightly toward Janelle. Is this about what I think it is? She whispered. Janelle didn't answer. She couldn't. Because everyone had heard the rumors. They had existed for years. At first, they had been little more than whispers. Online speculation. Questions from viewers. People comparing dates, old clips, documents, and family timelines. Some wondered whether certain details about Robyn's children had ever been fully explained. But rumors are easy to ignore when nobody has evidence. A rumor can be dismissed. A comment can be deleted. A question can be laughed away. A piece of verified evidence is different. And now Meri had placed a folder in front of a judge. The judge finally looked up. Mrs. Brown, I see here that this document references a DNA test conducted approximately 6 months ago. Yes, Your Honor. And who requested the test? Meri answered without hesitation. I did. Kody suddenly stood. This is outrageous. His voice echoed through the courtroom. Meri didn't react. Kody continued. She's attempting to embarrass us again. This is a family matter. This has nothing to do with Mr. Brown. The judge's voice cut through him. Kody stopped. But he remained standing. This is about money, not sit down, Mr. Brown. Kody's jaw tightened. He looked toward Meri. You've been resentful since the divorce. You think you can rewrite history now with some pseudoscience. Meri finally turned toward him. Her expression remained controlled. The judge's gavel struck the bench. Mr. Brown. The sound echoed across the room. Sit down. Kody slowly lowered himself into his chair. Meri looked back toward the judge. This test was administered under court-sanctioned supervision, she said. The chain of custody was confirmed, and the laboratory is accredited. She paused. I have nothing to fabricate. Robyn finally spoke. Her voice was shaking. Why, Meri? Meri turned toward her. Robyn's eyes were wet. Why would you do this? Why no? Meri stared at her for several seconds. Then she answered. Because I was sick of acting like we didn't all know the truth. Christine brought a hand to her mouth. Janelle leaned back in shock. The judge looked carefully between the women. You are suggesting fraud, Mrs. Brown? Meri nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Then she added something that made the courtroom even quieter. But not only financial fraud. She took a breath. This evidence confirms that there has been a falsehood at the center of this family for more than a decade. Robyn's hands tightened around the edge of the table. Kody's face appeared pale. Meri continued. The DNA test doesn't merely reveal it. It verifies it. The judge closed the folder. For the moment, this court will recess for 10 minutes while I examine the submitted material privately. The gavel struck. The courtroom erupted into movement. But the silence among the family members was almost louder than the whispers around them. The judge disappeared behind the courtroom doors with the blue folder. And suddenly, everyone was left with the same question. What exactly was inside it? 10 minutes had never felt so long. Christine tapped her fingers against her notebook. Janelle leaned forward, listening for anything coming from the hallway. Kody stood and began pacing. His movements were short and restless. He looked like someone desperately trying to understand what was happening while simultaneously trying to convince himself that it wasn't happening at all. Robyn remained seated. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered. She barely responded. Her eyes were fixed on the courtroom doors. Meri didn't move. She sat in exactly the same position. Hands folded. Back straight. Eyes forward. There was something almost unnerving about her calmness. For years, Meri had been portrayed as someone struggling with the consequences of family conflict. Someone hurt by rejection. Someone dealing with disappointment and separation. But this was different. This Meri wasn't asking anyone for permission. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't explaining herself. She had brought evidence. And she was waiting for the court to examine it. Eventually, the courtroom doors opened. Judge Halverson walked back toward the bench. His glasses rested low on his nose. His forehead was deeply furrowed. Everyone sat up. The judge looked across the room before speaking. "The court will reconvene." Meri watched him. The judge addressed her directly. "Mrs. Brown, you have submitted documentation concerning a DNA test conducted in accordance with applicable guidelines, with verified samples and documented chain of custody." Meri nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "And the child referenced in this documentation is currently under the legal guardianship of Mr. and Mrs. Brown?" "Yes." The judge looked down at the documents. "And according to the laboratory findings, the child is biologically related to you." Meri's eyes became glassy. She nodded once. Then she said it. "He's my son." The words struck the courtroom like a physical force. Christine gasped. Janelle whispered, "No." Robyn's entire body jolted. Kody stood again. "She's lying." The judge immediately struck the gavel. "Mr. Brown." Kody's chest was rising and falling rapidly. "That's impossible. If you interrupt again, I will have you removed from this courtroom." Kody stopped. The judge continued. "The DNA report establishes a 97% maternal match." Meri looked down. The judge read further. "According to the supplemental affidavit, the child in question was born within the time frame identified by Mrs. Brown and was registered under another name in Arizona." He paused. Then he looked directly at Meri. "Would you care to explain to this court how a child biologically related to you came to be raised by another Brown family member, while your name does not appear on the relevant records?" Meri remained silent for a moment. Then she answered, "Yes, Your Honor." She turned toward Kody, then toward Robyn. "But I'm not the one who should be explaining." The courtroom became completely still. "They are." Kody didn't answer. Robyn didn't answer. The judge looked from one to the other. Finally, Meri began to speak. It all began long before the cameras. Her voice was quieter now. Before TLC. Before contracts. Before fame. Before everyone had a public version of the Brown family that had to be protected. Meri looked toward the distance. It began when we were still trying to convince ourselves that love could fix everything. And then she began telling the story. Years earlier, before the family had become what viewers knew, Meri remembered sitting in a small house while rain struck the roof. Bills were spread across the kitchen table. The family was struggling financially. Every dollar mattered. Every argument felt larger than it should have. Meri had been sitting there with paperwork surrounding her when Kody entered. He was holding his phone. He was smiling. "Good news," he said. Meri looked up. "What's happened?" Kody's smile grew. "Robyn's pregnant." Meri's pen slipped from her hand. "Pregnant? Already?" He laughed. "It's a blessing. You should be happy for her." Meri tried to smile, but something inside her had shifted. She looked at him. There was something about the timing, something about the dates, something that didn't make sense. "You said." Kody interrupted. "Don't begin." Then he walked out. Meri sat there alone. And the question remained. How could the timeline work? At the time, Meri didn't have evidence. She told herself it was stress. Maybe she was jealous. Maybe she was exhausted. Maybe she was simply looking for something to blame because the family was already falling apart around her. So she said nothing. She buried the question. She continued living. She continued appearing in family moments. She continued trying to hold together a life that was becoming increasingly difficult to recognize. But the question never disappeared. Years passed. Then other inconsistencies appeared. Medical records. Financial records. Dates. Forms. Statements that didn't seem to line up. Meri began noticing things she couldn't explain. She didn't confront anyone immediately. She watched. She listened. She waited. And eventually, according to her testimony, she received a message from someone she never expected to hear from. A laboratory technician. The person was connected to medical testing performed in Flagstaff. There had been an inconsistency in records related to one of Robyn's pregnancies. A missing entry. An exchanged signature. Something that didn't fit. Meri's suspicions became something more serious. She started searching quietly. Not publicly. Not dramatically. She gathered documents. She compared dates. She looked through old emails. She reviewed records. And eventually she believed she had enough information to request a DNA test. Back in the courtroom, Meri looked directly at the judge. I wasn't angry, she said. I wasn't jealous. She paused. I was correct. Nobody spoke. The judge folded his hands. And this truth is what prompted the DNA test? Yes, Your Honor. Meri swallowed. Because the child registered as Robyn's. Her voice briefly broke. Is biologically mine. Christine looked devastated. Janelle appeared stunned. Reporters began writing furiously. The judge struck the gavel. This court will review all relevant historical birth and custody records before proceeding further. People began to shift in their seats. But then Robyn spoke. Her voice was broken. You don't understand. Meri turned. Robyn's face was wet with tears. You gave him away. Meri stared at her. No. Her voice was quiet. You took him. The courtroom froze. Robyn shook her head. No. Meri didn't look away. You took him. Kody looked between them. Christine leaned forward. Let her finish. The judge didn't interrupt. Because whatever was happening was no longer simply about documents. Meri had spent years holding something inside. Now it was coming out. She took a breath. I was mourning. Her voice trembled. I had suffered another miscarriage. She looked down for a moment. I was already broken. She continued. I had been told I needed time to heal. I was told I wasn't emotionally stable. I was told that bringing another child into the family could make everything worse. Kody's expression changed. Meri looked at him. You told me that. Kody said nothing. Meri continued. You said that if we ever had another child, it would tear the family apart. Janelle looked toward Christine. Christine folded her arms tightly. Meri's voice became stronger. So when I became pregnant again, I didn't tell everyone. The judge leaned forward. Who knew? Meri looked toward Robyn. She did. Robyn shook her head. No. Meri's voice rose. Yes. She looked directly at her. You promised to help. Robyn's lips trembled. You said you'd step in while I figured things out. Meri's eyes filled with tears. You said we could do it together. The courtroom was silent. Meri continued. I believed you. She paused. I trusted you. Her voice became softer. And somewhere between the third trimester and the hospital room, everything changed. She looked down at her hands. Suddenly my name was gone from the forms. Robyn closed her eyes. You appeared as the mother. Meri's voice cracked. You and Kody were on everything. Christine whispered, oh my God. Meri wiped a tear from her cheek. I was instructed not to confuse the family. She looked toward the judge. I was told it would hurt the brand. That word changed everything. Brand. For years, the family had been living increasingly under public attention. Their private struggles had become part of a television narrative. Their marriages, disagreements, financial struggles, children, homes, and relationships were no longer simply family matters. They were stories. And Meri was now telling the court that somewhere inside that story, her own child had allegedly been erased from her identity. The judge looked down at the documents. Mrs. Brown, are you claiming that legal custody of this child was fraudulently conveyed without your permission? Meri didn't hesitate. I'm not alleging it, Your Honor. She looked directly at him. I'm proving it. The judge lifted the DNA report. The number was clear. 97%. Meri Brown. Then the other figure. 0%. Robyn Brown. The judge read it again. The document was only a piece of paper. But in that courtroom, it had become heavier than everything the family had argued about before. Money. Homes. Property. Marriage. Trust. Public image. All of it suddenly seemed connected to one deeper question. Who had been telling the truth? The judge looked toward Meri. The child identified in these filings as being the child of Mr. and Mrs. Brown is biologically yours? Yes. And you possess supporting documentation? Birth records. She paused. Emails. Another pause. Custody transfer forms. The judge looked toward Kody. Kody's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, we strongly object to the characterization of those documents. Meri turned toward the attorney. I haven't even shown them yet. The attorney stopped. The judge raised his hand. Enough. He looked toward Meri. Those documents will be examined by the court. Meri nodded. Then she said something that made Christine turn toward her. I kept everything. Janelle whispered, all these years. Meri nodded. All these years. She had kept the emails, the records, the forms, the messages, the dates. Everything she had been told would never matter. Everything she had been told to forget. Everything she had been told was better left in the past. She kept it. And now it was in a courtroom. The judge ordered the relevant documents preserved and reviewed. But before the hearing could move forward, Robyn suddenly spoke. Her voice was barely audible. You don't know what happened. Meri looked at her. Then tell them. Robyn couldn't. Kody stepped in. This is a misunderstanding. Christine immediately responded. A misunderstanding doesn't produce a DNA test. Kody looked toward her. Christine, stay out of this. Christine stood. No. The judge struck the gavel. Everyone will remain seated. Christine sat back down. But her eyes remained on Kody. Janelle looked devastated. She had heard years of arguments. She had watched the family change. She had witnessed marriages fall apart. She had seen people leave. But this was something different. This wasn't another disagreement. This was a claim about identity. A claim about motherhood. A claim that a child had been placed under another person's name. And now there was a DNA report sitting on a judge's desk. Meri looked around the room. For the first time, she wasn't trying to protect anyone. I spent years thinking I was the problem. Her voice was low. I thought maybe I was too emotional. She looked at Kody. Maybe too difficult. Then Robyn. Maybe too jealous. She took a breath. But eventually I realized that sometimes the person being told they're crazy is simply the person who keeps asking questions nobody wants answered. The courtroom fell silent again. Meri continued. I asked questions. I was told to stop. I asked for records. I was told I was creating drama. I asked why dates didn't match. I was told I was remembering incorrectly. She looked at the judge. So I stopped asking. She paused. And I started documenting. That sentence landed differently. The judge leaned back. The attorneys began taking notes. Kody looked toward Robyn. Robyn looked down. Meri continued. I didn't know when I'd need it. She touched the folder. But I knew one day someone would ask me to prove what I knew. She opened another section. And today, Your Honor, I'm ready. The judge instructed the clerk to mark the documents for review. The room remained tense. But Meri wasn't finished. She had told them about the pregnancy. She had told them about the hospital. She had told them about the paperwork. She had explained why she believed her identity had been removed from the records. But there was still one question hanging over the courtroom. Why? Why would anyone do this? Why would a family member take a child and register that child under another woman's name? Why would Meri be pressured into silence? And most importantly, what happened between the pregnancy and the moment the child's records were changed? The judge looked at Meri. Mrs. Brown, before we proceed, I need you to explain the circumstances surrounding the birth. Meri took a long breath. Her hands trembled for the first time. The birth was not supposed to happen the way it did. Everyone listened. She continued. I had been told to stay quiet. By whom? Meri looked toward Kody. Then toward Robyn. By people I trusted. The courtroom became still. I was told that the family couldn't survive another scandal. She swallowed. I was told that everyone would blame me. Christine shook her head slowly. Meri continued. And when the child was born, I was barely allowed to see him. Janelle covered her mouth. Robyn began crying. Meri's voice remained steady. They told me it was temporary. The judge asked, temporary. Yes. How long? Meri looked down. I don't know. She looked back up. At first, I thought it would be days. Then weeks. Then months. Then years. And eventually Meri said, I realized temporary had become permanent. No one spoke. The judge looked at the documents again. Meri continued. By the time I understood what had happened, the records already told a different story. The judge asked, and you challenged that? I tried. What happened? Meri looked toward Kody. I was told not to. The judge's expression hardened. By whom? Meri answered. By Kody. Kody shook his head. That's not true. Meri didn't react. I have the messages. Kody's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. Let her continue. Meri opened the folder. There were printed messages, emails, copies of forms, notes. The years had been preserved on paper. She placed the first set of documents before the clerk. The clerk accepted them. The judge reviewed them. His expression grew more serious. Kody's attorney whispered urgently to him. Kody looked increasingly uncomfortable. Robyn stared at the table. Christine and Janelle sat completely still. The judge finally spoke. This court is going to require a complete review of the custody documentation. Meri nodded. And the court will also require clarification regarding the discrepancies between the medical and legal records. Meri nodded again. Then the judge looked at Kody. Mr. Brown, you will provide all requested records. Kody's attorney immediately began to object. The judge raised his hand. I have made my order. Silence. Kody sat down. Meri closed the folder. But then she looked toward the judge. There is something else. The judge paused. What? Meri's eyes moved toward Robyn. The DNA test was not the only reason I came here. Robyn looked up. Kody turned. Christine leaned forward. Janelle stared at Meri. The judge asked, what else? Meri slowly placed another document on the table. This is the record that made me realize the DNA test wasn't the end. She slid it forward. The judge took it. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. He read it again. What is this? Meri answered. The original record. Kody's face drained of color. Robyn closed her eyes. The judge looked up. Original of what? Meri stared straight ahead. The document that existed before my name was removed. The courtroom went silent. Meri continued. And that's why I believe this wasn't a mistake. She looked directly at the judge. I believe it was deliberate. The judge's expression became severe. Mrs. Brown, are you alleging intentional alteration of legal records? Meri answered immediately. Yes. Kody's attorney stood. Objection. The judge looked at him. On what basis? We haven't been provided, you will be. The attorney sat. The judge looked back at Meri. Where did you obtain this document? Meri answered. I kept it. All these years. Yes. Why? Meri's eyes filled with tears. Because it was the last document that still had my name on it. Christine looked away, crying quietly. Janelle wiped her face. Even the reporters had stopped writing for a moment. There was something deeply personal about the sentence. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about television. It wasn't about winning. It was about a mother looking at a document and realizing that someone had attempted to erase her from her own child's history. The judge carefully placed the document beside the DNA report. Then he looked at the two pieces of evidence together. One established biological connection. The other appeared to establish a different version of the child's history. The judge leaned back. This court will need to determine how these records came to differ. Meri nodded. I know. The judge looked toward the attorneys. We are not going to resolve this through shouting. Nobody moved. We will resolve it through evidence. Meri looked down. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she appeared exhausted. But she also appeared relieved. The secret was no longer hers alone. It was now part of the official record. And once something enters the record, it becomes much harder to erase. The judge announced that the court would continue reviewing the documents. The hearing moved toward another recess. But before anyone could leave, Robyn stood. Meri. Meri stopped. Robyn's voice broke. You don't understand what I was trying to do. Meri slowly turned around. Then explain it. Robyn opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Kody stepped toward her. Robyn, don't. Meri watched him. And suddenly, another piece of the story became clear. She looked at Kody. That's what you've always done. Kody stared. You speak for everyone. Meri's voice remained calm. You decide what gets said. She looked toward Robyn. "You decide who is allowed to explain." Then back toward Kody. "And you decide which version of the family everyone else is supposed to believe." Kody's expression hardened. "That's enough." Meri shook her head. "No." She held the blue folder against her side. "It isn't." Then she walked away. Christine watched her leave. Janelle sat motionless. Robyn remained standing. Kody stared after Meri. And the judge looked down at the documents on his desk. The courtroom had begun the day expecting another family dispute. Instead, it had uncovered a story that could potentially reshape everything the Brown family thought it knew about its own past. The blue folder had arrived quietly. It had no dramatic label, no headline, no flashing warning, just documents. But sometimes documents are more powerful than accusations. Because accusations can be denied. Documents can be examined. Numbers can be checked. Signatures can be compared. Dates can be reconstructed. And DNA can establish a biological connection with a precision that leaves very little room for storytelling. As Meri disappeared through the courtroom doors, one question followed her. If the DNA report was only the beginning, what else had she kept? And why had she waited until now to reveal it? The answer, according to Meri, was simple. She had waited because she had spent years being told that silence was better for the family. Now she believed silence was only protecting the people who had benefited from it. The hearing was not over. Not even close. Because the judge had ordered the historical records reviewed. And those records could reveal whether the paperwork had truly been altered. They could reveal who signed what. They could reveal when the child's identity changed. And they could reveal whether Meri had been removed from the record without her consent. For Kody and Robyn, the next phase of the hearing could be even more difficult. For Christine and Janelle, it raised questions they had never expected to confront. And for Meri, the blue folder represented something she had been carrying for years. Not simply evidence. A history. Her history. The history of a child she said had been taken from her. The history of a family that had been built around secrets. And the history of a woman who had finally decided that she was done protecting everyone else's version of the truth. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already waiting. They wanted answers. They wanted to know what the DNA report said. They wanted to know who the child was. They wanted to know what Kody and Robyn knew. They wanted to know whether the court would recognize Meri's claims. But inside, the judge had already made one thing clear. The next step would not be decided by television cameras. It would be decided by evidence. And as the courtroom doors closed behind Meri, the blue folder remained on the judge's desk. Waiting. Because part 1 of the hearing had revealed the DNA bombshell. But the documents inside that folder appeared to promise something even bigger. The truth about how Meri's name disappeared. The truth about who authorized the changes. The truth about what happened after the child was born. And perhaps the most painful question of all, if Meri was telling the truth, how long had the people closest to her known? The courtroom emptied slowly. Christine and Janelle remained behind for several minutes. Kody's attorneys gathered around him. Robyn stood alone near the table. Meri was gone, but her evidence remained. And for the first time in years, the Brown family could no longer simply walk away from the questions. The questions had become evidence. The evidence had become part of the court record. And the court record had become impossible to ignore. The blue folder had opened. And whatever came next could change.